Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Evie Botelho. Welcome to my channel here, Gardens of Evie, which is connected with our Peak Prosperity channel. And for those of you who are not aware, Peak Prosperity is a family channel run by Chris Martinson and I. Well, more Chris Martinson than myself. He's the brain behind the whole production, and we talk about resilience and we talk about the economy and the environment and all sorts of interesting things. If you are interested in checking that out, please do. We have a website as well called peakprosperity.com, which has a huge online resilience community, and it's a great place to make some friends and have some folks to talk about when you're feeling alone in this wild world and you're not sure kind of where to go with that information or where to go with the feelings you're having and the questions you have. It's a wonderful resource place and a place to interact with Chris as well. So please join us there if you so feel inclined. I'm so glad to be spending this afternoon with you again. I look forward to the times that we do and get to engage together and have together. And man, it's been a whirlwind week since I saw you last. I'm wondering how your week was. I hope it went well. I'm curious about what went on for you and how you're coping with it. And man, there's just so much crazy going on in this world too, which just gives a whole lot of things to digest and to think about and to consider, and also to communicate with our fellow humans. Before I get too far into this, though, I love to read things to you. I'm sure I could fill up an entire live cast just sharing poetry and other wonderful writing, but I wanted to share something that I felt like embodied what I love talking about, which is about nature and humans and how we interact with our world and how our world influences us, how it can hurt us and harm us, and also how it can nourish us. And that pertains to everything from the structures that we live within, but also the world that we cultivate and understand outside of us and within us and around us. And I just love being here on our farm. We live on about 250 acres of beautiful land in Massachusetts. We have a herd of cows and a bunch of chickens. Sometimes we have pigs, rabbits, a huge garden, and lots of forest. And it's such a beautiful haven. It's a great place to be when you're feeling a little out of sorts, but it's a wonderful place to be in terms of grounding yourself into your everyday living needs. And growing food is a huge part of that. It's becoming more important, the way I see it, as I hear about things going on in our food system and the things and the chemicals they're putting into our food, that it just makes so much sense to be growing your food because you know what's in it, or at least you know more of what's in it. And you can control the inputs, you can control how it's processed. So I get a huge amount of joy from that. And it is a ton of work as well. Anybody that's done a garden knows you get to a point where you're exhausted and things still need doing. It's kind of like having kids in that sense. And so today I want to share with you a little bit about our garden and what it's been doing this year. And I promised you that I would figure the technology out to be able to bring you outside. And so far, this is the best I can do. So I'm going to do that in a second. But before then, I wanted to share something from a wonderful book. The name of this book, for anybody that's interested, is Nature and the Human Soul. It's by Bill Plotkin. It's called Cultivating Wholeness and Community in a Fragmented World. It is so good. It walks through the stages of developmental psychology and human development overall, not just psychological, but all of the various aspects of ourselves that grow. And it's looking at that from the view of how we belong in nature, how nature also affects and influences us and shapes us, and how we're built for community. We're built to be in a village where other villagers can help hold the space of our lives with us and celebrate the happenings in it, the births, the deaths, the birthdays, the spiritual birthdays, the physical birthdays, the triumphs and the defeats, right? And I really feel the loss of this. I feel also the archetype for it. I feel the blueprint in my own heart for it. And so when I find somebody like Bill Plotkin, who also wrote a book called Soulcraft, when I read something like what he writes, I feel like he's speaking to me in a way that's really special. And I encourage anybody that's interested in these types of things to check out his book. It's excellent. So he wrote about one of the stages that I really appreciate, which is just that of being a child and being in play and being outside in a world where you're learning about yourself, but you're learning through interacting with other beings, and not all of those beings are human. A lot of them are animals, or your larger world, and all the beautiful and interesting and completely fascinating and complex things outside of us in our natural world. The systems that interface and interact and are all interconnected are so important to learn about. And I feel so fortunate as a kid that I was outside for most of that. I spent most of my after school days climbing up trees and making forts and wading, getting my pants wet, wading into the streams and ponds and catching frogs. I mean, you name it. I just enjoyed this area in the Northeast. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I loved it. And I loved being outside in the various seasons and all the things that one would find, depending on the time of year, the falling leaves and making huge piles and jumping into them. And I'm sure you have memories too that come up for you at every season based on where you grew up. And my true hope is that the children that are coming up now, the children that are being born, that they're going to know this natural world in some sense, that the entirety of their childhood isn't going to be spent on one of these. It makes me sad to think about what we're having to contend with, and how, as a parent, the programs on these phones and tablets and this technology has hijacked the brains of our children in such a way that, climbing a tree and being alone on a tire swing can't compete with whatever's on these devices. And I can certainly appreciate the challenge that it is. I have two children. One is in college right now, and the youngest is turning 12 soon. And she definitely is, I think, as she comes into her own adolescence, just feeling the pull of that, and of course is being influenced by it. And it's so hard as a parent to walk that line, because you really don't want to have tons of points of friction with your children, right? Especially if you only have short periods with them because they're in school, you don't have the ability to homeschool, and so on. So I find myself in a place of wanting to contribute or create at some point, at least on this farm, an educational opportunity where kids can come and be a part of what we're doing here and learn how to just be in a beautiful space of curiosity again. And so he writes, let me get on with this here. Bill Plotkin writes, he was quoting somebody named Richard Lewis, who wrote something called Living by Wonder. In our grasshopper and salamander days, who among us didn't ask why the grasshopper could jump so far, or why the salamander had black dots on his orange body? We trampled leaves with our feet just to hear what kinds of sounds leaves made. We threw flat stones over the surface of streams to see how far the stones could skip. We listened to crickets cry in the nights, far beyond our grasp of what the darkness was. We slept, only to wake with the strange sense of how we could be awake when we had only just been sleeping. In those days, we knew as much as we had to know in order to ask what we didn't know. Our ignorance wasn't just innocence, but the foundation from which we offered ourselves the daily surprise of discovering another question, another way to uncover something mysterious, something we hadn't understood yesterday. We lived by wonder, for by wondering, we were able to multiply a growing consciousness of being alive. I just think that's so great. I really am. I'm actually going to look at this gentleman's work, because I love what he wrote about. And I hope it brought up some nostalgic things for you as well. We live in a world that it just feels bereft of meaning sometimes. And of course, it's a create your own sort of meaning world in the first place. But so I guess if you have a very interesting Facebook page that keeps you just entranced, you're going to see life differently than somebody else who maybe doesn't have as many connections or social supports or whatever. But I don't know. I just find it to be intense to follow along with what's happening in the world and other people's reactions to it. And this last weekend, I had the great opportunity, Chris and I, to go up to host our annual summit. And each year we gather as many people as we can fit into a container that we create. We've curated one here on our farm for the last few years. And this was a continuation of that, but also sort of combining with what we've done every year as an annual summit, so to speak. And so we had 3 lovely days with folks who came from all over the world, which was fascinating. We had like 300 people, and we just got to be with them face to face. We got to have these types of conversations about things that really matter and that are important to each of us. And we got to bounce them off of other like-minded souls. And oh my goodness, it was so refreshing. I mean, I'm starting to understand in the reverse from having grown up in a church and then having left it for a while. Not my spirituality necessarily, but the church. And then to have this experience where I'm communing with other like-minded people and just feeling the inherent power in that, right? There is so much power in that. There's so much strength in it. I think that's one reason why the powers that be don't necessarily want us uniting together, because they know that if they can keep us feeling scared and small and isolated, that they have a better shot of controlling or manipulating us, right? So, excuse me. I just was really enjoying getting to meet all these people in person that in some cases I'd only met online before, or had watched our programs or our shows. And it was fabulous. We also had fantastic weather up there, which was lovely. And we did some really interesting, had some experiential learnings together, and people presented. So we had people talking about financial things and gold and silver and Bitcoin and investment sort of stuff. And then we also had folks discussing what it was like to build a homestead and how they had succeeded and failed and where that had been happening for them, just sharing their own personal experience and on and on. We had permaculture design specialists and people that could really speak to what we really need to do differently as a society if we want to preserve our farmland and get things back on track in terms of our food safety and our food sovereignty. And it was just such an excellent time. It was so good. And of course, being there by this beautiful lake really pulled in that physical beauty, which is kind of what I'm talking about. Just there was something that stirred me from being in such a beautiful place. And I appreciated being there with everyone very much. And one of the other things that I got to do, which I felt so privileged to do, was to have a circle of women just come together. And, you know, women have been doing this forever. We've been having circles and connecting with each other, aunties, sisters, mothers, grandmothers, daughters. We've been doing this as long as humans have existed. But I think we've forgotten, at least in parts of the American culture, it's not something that everybody prioritizes anymore. I think in some Latin American cultures, it's still a thing where you have a family gathering and like the aunties and everybody gets together and cooks and creates a meal that then everyone shares. Things of that nature become less and less, I guess, in my opinion, at least in my experience. And I really long for that camaraderie with other women, not just other like-minded souls, which is wonderful, but also other women, because men and women are very different, and their needs and their ways of expressing themselves are often very different. And I think we really need that core group of sisters to be able to have a grounded sense of ourselves and to have our own life experiences also reflected back to us. And so we had the circle and there's like, I don't know, 20 of us or whatever. And we didn't share for very long. But what was so beautiful was that as we went around in this circle, each woman shared, you know, whatever she was carrying in that moment, whatever she had been struggling with or felt called to invite the group to hold with her. And it was so beautiful because none of the stories were the same. And yet I think each of us saw ourselves in these little vignettes. And I felt so privileged to be able to be witness to those stories. And I think having witness is a really critical part of what it means to be a human. And that's what we're doing in this natural world too. We're witnessing it. We're there to see and appreciate all this beauty and all these intricate webs of life. And it's something our consciousness allows us to do. And I think it's very special. So I just feel so much gratitude for that. And I still feel a lot of energy from it. It really touched my heart and made me feel open to all these people that I had in some cases had just met. And I want more of that in the world. And I want more in-person things as well, because there's a magic that happens when you're face to face with somebody, eye to eye, heart to heart, where you can really exchange the things that I think are nourishing to us on absolutely every level, you know, not just our thoughts and feelings, but think about our biology and how our nervous system is wired and how we're electrically inclined and how, you know, even bacteria on our skin, like when we hug another human, we're exchanging little pieces of data on every fractal level. It's just so incredible. So let me share with you what I've got for you about our farm. And this is a presentation that I previously did up there, although it was more of a discussion when I presented it up in New Hampshire. Hang on a sec. All right. So this here is my beautiful youngest daughter. That's Aurelia. And she's plucking a dandelion seed head apart, which I think I remember doing a million times as a kid. I'm sure you do too. And I just want to invite all of us to cultivate curiosity in our lives. I feel like curiosity leads to so many wonderful places. So here we are. That's Chris and I sending our greetings from our farm here, our garden. And this is our house. If you were to drive up and see it, this is what it looks like. We live in this old retrofitted barn, and it definitely reads like a barn on the inside. It's a little bit of a hamster maze, but it's fun. There are beams in odd places and things that definitely wasn't designed initially with humans in mind, and you can feel that, but there's something really beautiful about it too. It feels nestled in this little valley that we're in, and it just belongs here on the land. We had a really wonderful year of growth. There were lots of things that did super well this year. It also didn't hurt that we didn't have those early cold snaps that had initially just damaged our peaches last year. We didn't get a single peach. I'm actually not sure there were any in New England because we had that crazy whiplash of temperatures that was going back and forth for a little bit in the early spring. And so we've had a really good season here at Honey Badger. I planted a whole bunch of perennials in the front garden. We also have an ivy that crawls up our fireplace. It's giant. You could probably see it in the background there. I put up hog paneling right underneath the fence there, which is great because then I plant peas and beans and tomatoes and grapes and things that like to crawl up that. You'll see it there in the left-hand corner. It's perfect. And so that kind of hides the underneath part of our porch, but also serves as a natural support. One note is that, oh, there's two cursors on here, is that this, how can I move that? Okay, sorry about that. This right here, this is a butterfly bush. This thing is insane. I thought I had to pamper it. Not the case. It is the most proliferate like bush I've ever met. It's actually over here on the left too. It just self-seeded again, and then it's seeded all over our porch, growing out of the cracks of places. So when you see it in the store, don't spend $40 on it. Go over to your neighbors and just take a cutting. But it's great for pollinators. The bees and the butterflies and other insects really enjoy it. It's fun. This is the sweet, some of the sweet birds we had here this year. We had a lot of grosbeaks. We had a group of starlings, not quite a murmur because there weren't quite that many, you know, when they form a giant grouping and then they just sort of undulate through the sky when they're flying together. It's really neat to see. We've had, of course, we have the common ones for New England. We have cardinals and blue jays and robins and chickadees and nuthatches and all sorts of stuff, and phoebes, which are really sweet. And this is a little wren that had been, I think, just newly sort of thrust out of the nest. And he just was hopping around on our back porch, wondering if somebody was going to feed him. And then he sort of got into this tired state, I think, after he had eaten. And he just started to take a nap with his head kind of held backward like that. It was so funny. And we also have a lot of hummingbirds that come to our porch. Do you guys have hummingbirds too? It's so fun to watch them just whiz by your ear. And the males are really territorial, so they often fight, and we've had to put feeders sort of in various places spaced apart from each other because otherwise it's just nonstop fighting and they don't actually get to drink. So despite that, right before I think they finished being up north here for this is the ruby-throated hummingbird, by the way. Right by the time they finished being up here for the summer and we're heading back down south, we had like 12 of them at one feeder at a time. It was crazy. I'd never seen so many. Sorry, that picture's blurry, but I took it from inside. This is part of our vegetable garden here, and I'll just use this arrow if that works. The way that we have it laid out, it's a pretty large garden. I want to say it's like 30 by 40 or 40 by 50. It's pretty big. Right on the right here, these are all asparagus, kind of clouding it out. And this is just a picture I took because I love the way this contrast looked with the mountain in the background. But these are our grapes right along here. We have some taut lines that we've stretched that we planted grapes along, and they are we're going to have to tighten them again because they just get so heavy every year, but they're doing great. We also have a ton of, what's it called? Milkweed, sorry, right here that tends to flower out in those beautiful pink clusters that smell really good. That's the thing that the monarch butterflies love to eat, which I talked about, I think, in my previous podcast. We have lots of volunteers in our garden that do that. We've got garlic over here, which you can see. Our garlic did great this year. And interestingly, we have fennel seeds that keep self-seeding, and they get to be like 8 feet tall. And then they crash over onto whatever else. But I like to leave them because there are also butterfly larvae that hatch out or that enjoy eating them. And so I kind of let them be just in case somebody needs habitat. This is our kale. I love this kale. I think it's called dinosaur kale or red Russian kale, maybe. It's I took this picture because I wanted to show you how, and this isn't even as large as they ended up getting. This they are actually much bigger now. I took this a couple weeks ago, but I always want to plant the starts or the seedlings that we grow closer together because they're so tiny. It seems like they're never actually going to be taking up that much room, and surely I could fit 6 in a bed if I stagger them, and I try to get all creative, but inevitably I end up crowding my garden every single year, which is fine. It all works out, but Everything just went nuts this year. I'm curious what other people's experiences are. It's just hard to imagine that it's going to get that large, but it always just surprises me in terms of size. Um, Chris and I plant as much as we can for pollinators of all kinds. We try to attract hummingbirds and bees, obviously, and there are also, beyond bees, there are lots of other types of pollinators as well. So we're a pro insect kind of farm, even if it means that it might stink for us having leaves that aren't, peppered with holes. That's okay. If an insect wants to eat it, that means it's actually going to be healthy for me. So I'm good with that. I love planting things that are edible and beautiful. And the nasturtium over here on the right is one of those things. Growing sunflowers is always fun because they get enormous as well. And the birds, if I leave them into the fall, the birds will really enjoy just plucking seeds out of them as they continue searching for things to eat into the winter, those that stay here in New England. I planted a lot of new fruit and nut trees this year. Additionally, a lot of roses. I wanted to just pepper the landscape with beautiful plants that had multiple purposes. So I like hips for various things. Rose hip tea is great. Rose hips have so much that they offer the human body. Primarily, I think they're great with vitamin C, but I'm sure they have lots of other medicinal values as well. And I just enjoy seeing beautiful things all around. And this was these guys' first year being in the ground, and they did really, really well considering. I think I ended up with those little flea beetles that eat those tiny holes in them, and also some kind of little caterpillar that was munching on them. But the story of our peach trees is kind of funny. I made a mistake. I was ordering from Fedco, and you can choose your quantity when you're ordering, and you put how many of whatever the quantity is in the box. And I didn't realize that I was ordering like 3 of 3. So what I thought was 3 peach trees ended up being more peach trees. And anyhow, I messed up with that. So we had a whole lot, but that's okay. Our orchard has grown a lot this year. And for anybody that plants anything at all, you know that when you take a shovel and you are taking up sod, it's a lot of work. I think there are other ways to do it if you know in advance. Excuse me. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. I think when you know in advance you're going to be planting, there are things you can do to kill the grass where you're wanting to plant. You can put plastic down and kind of fry it, and that kills the weeds and the grass at the same time. Although I don't know how healthy that is for the soil in the long term, but you can put cardboard down or hay or other mulch, but just to sort of get it going if you know that you're going to be planting in that spot. But these are our this is a plum. We have Santa Rosa plums, and then we have peach tree, and then they're like, this is, I couldn't even fit them all into one frame, but there's a little baby apple over here. There's another small, I think that's peach tree, and then I have all blueberries on the side as well. And digging the holes for them was just brutal. And I don't know if it's because we have, we're kind of in a place where a lot of rocks and debris was deposited from glaciers and also from the river. I think over hundreds of years, it left, this riverbed full of sorted rocks. So as you go down, it's just these giant round stones, and you can tell that it's from the river because of their shape. And hauling those things out is such a pain in the neck. So digging those holes was a little intense, and our spring was definitely fraught with a lot of just dirt and sweat. And it's the sweat equity that you put into your farmstead or your homestead, because you know that in the future it's going to be beneficial or wonderful. But in that moment, it might not be that much fun. But here on the right is a Santa Rosa plum, that I rescued from the blue jays who like to go in and spear them and just peck holes in all your fruit. So they all kind of waste away without being able to be eaten unless you pick them, I think, in advance of them actually being ripe. Unless, yeah, I guess that's how you do it. Because if you threw like one of those bird netting things over a fruit tree, I think it would be rather hard to manage or get off even afterward. Because my trees are dwarfs, but they're still not that tiny. But anyway, these plums are so delicious. If you like sweet and tangy things with this crimson, orangey red dripping juice, oh, it's just, I can't even put into words the experience of eating that plum, but I took a bite. I cheated on my keto. It was so good. It was really delicious. These are our purple cabbages this year, just a couple of them. They turned out really well. Again, this is another vegetable that when I plant it, I'm initially shocked at how tiny they are. And then by the time they're larger, these big fan leaves just shade out everything around them. So if you do try to plant other things around them, you have to be very thoughtful of where you put them, and you try to get something else that might grow up more than it grows wide. And these are great. Cabbages are really easy, and they also are wonderful for making kimchi or sauerkraut, and easy to keep as far as a vegetable goes. They don't need to be like refrigerated. I think I've heard that you can, if you pluck them out of the ground without cutting them and you hang them by their root, that they do better. I haven't tried that yet, but I enjoy having this. And anyhow, they are a welcome friend in our garden every single year. We tried some new things this year. For anybody that lives in the South, I have no experience with okra, but I thought I would try. And we've got it's interesting. They come out like in these clusters, like a hand almost with fingers, and they ripen like that. And then I think if you keep picking them, they keep blooming and more okra comes. But I think you have to plant a significant amount to get a harvest, kind of like other vegetables as well, like bean plants. If you just, planted one bean plant, you're going to get a few every now and then, but not quite enough to add to a meal in any significant way as a standalone kind of thing. So this is something I'm looking forward to trying next year again. These are beets that we planted. We've got a lot of voles that like to help me with harvesting these things. These are white, like some kind of white beet that I found that I like. They're really sweet. They don't get as large as the other regular sugar beets, but these are great. The greens are really good too for juicing. If you like to juice, you just go and pick a few leaves, one or two from each plant, and then they just regenerate that growth, that green. And then you throw it into a blender with other fruits or whatever you're doing, and it's just so good for you. Excuse me, I think they're great for dual purpose things. But yeah, every now and then I go out and I'll go to pick up a beet and I pluck up the top. It seems like it's growing, and then there's nothing underneath because the voles have just eaten it from below. But I do have, we got these barred owl nest boxes, or one of them, hopefully two. They're kind of expensive. They're made out of this poly sort of hardcore, it's never going to rot kind of material, which is nice. But it does make it harder to be able to afford very many of them. And of course, those kind of creatures find their own ways to nest if you don't have those, if you can't buy those. But barred owls and other owls are really great at keeping predator populations down. And I'm excited to see who nests in that, and I'll keep you posted. These are on the other side of the garden. We grew some string beans over here. They were the purple kind. Oh, you can't see them very well because of my head, but they're right underneath. These are soybeans, which I planted like a black variety just for fun. And anyway, those end up producing quite a bit per plant. which is a nice thing to know as a yield, as far as yields go. Um, and this is a newer thing I've just tried growing, and of course not in a huge quantity. It's like maybe a full row, which is, I don't know, 10 or 12 feet long, of soybeans. And these are my favorite tomatoes. These are this delicious Sun Gold variety. I don't know if you've ever tried that kind, but so good. They're just really sweet, and I think they're an indeterminate variety, which means that they just keep going and going. Like, whereas a determinate variety of tomato, all the tomatoes kind of arrive at a ripe stage at the same time, whereas the indeterminate varieties grow differently, but they also can be harvested differently, which is good and bad, I guess. If you're trying to do like a big, huge burst of, to use them for sauce, or if you're going to be making salsa or something that you want to put away, it's kind of nice to have a huge amount because it's such an effort to do. But these guys are so delicious raw. They're just incredibly good. We grew onions this year, and we're going to put them in our storage container that we buried, that is and reinforced and waterproofed and I don't have a picture of it in all its glory right now. I will take one for the next time I get to do this with you, because it's so beautiful, though, the way that Norm, who is helping us engineer some of the structural things that we're doing on this farm, he made this like curved wall of rocks around the door. So it's a wall that is holding the soil, and making sure that it doesn't all come crashing down to the entrance. But it's going to be a really nice root cellar for us, and a place to store some of these types of things, where otherwise it gets to be hard to keep your onions all year, or your potatoes, or your carrots, or your apples, because a lot of these things need a moist environment, and you probably don't want your basement to be moist. I know I don't. So we have this storage container, and we've outfitted it in such a way that we'll be able to keep a lot of our harvests, hopefully a little bit better. Asparagus is one of my favorite things to grow, and part of the reason for that is because it really doesn't take a whole lot of effort, and I'm all about the perennials because I have a lot of things that I want to do in this life, and I don't want to just garden all day long and only garden. I want to have time to do other things. So asparagus is just a great choice for a gardener who wants to have an early spring harvest, because it comes out and is ready before almost anything else aside from lettuces or greens. And ours are also, I think, habitat for lots of different things as well. I actually want to expand this bed a little bit. The only thing that's hard about them is that, number one, you have to really keep them well weeded and mulched, or else they don't do so well. They just don't compete as well with other more aggressive weeds that can come in. So I try to do that each year, and just also not to walk on them and damage the crowns, which at this point I doubt I could, unless it's right when they're just coming up through the ground. But I think they're a good way to go if you have enough space. The only problem is they do take up a fair amount. The root structure does. It's like a hosta. It's just this crazy, wild looking thing under there. And you can't plant a whole lot else when they're growing, because they actually need to grow up into this bushy stage to get all the nutrients and photosynthesize. And so you can't just like cut them down and plant something else over top, that kind of thing. These are our grapes. They are finally doing really well. It took a couple years. This is, I think, going to be our best harvest year so far. These particular grapes are 4 years old. Chris and I have planted grapes at other places we've lived, and then unfortunately had to leave those places and no longer have the benefit of those things we once tended, which is always hard. When you put a lot of effort and love and tender care into creating a homestead or a garden, and then you have to up and leave because you move, it's just so hard. And my heart goes out to anybody that's renting, and that it's for whom it's not easy to know that the things you have put in are going to be there in the future. Um, I've never tried having a grape just in a pot. I suppose you could. They're pretty hardy. They actually like being abused and cut back. These are a little crazy. They actually should not look this insane, but I was a little too generous when I was pruning this spring. You really can cut them back hard where there's just like two growth nodes on each lateral branching that you're trying to cultivate. And I do two, so two up here, or four rather, per plant. So two up here and two down below. So 2, 4, 6, 8 growth nodes. And then those go out and the fruits develop off of that old growth of the grape. But this is a little chaotic even for my taste, but I'm just happy they're doing well and they seem well acclimated now to where we have them. And this is a picture of them. They are Concord grapes, by the way. And right now they're actually just about ready, which I was surprised by. I think this year everything seems a little early here in Massachusetts. I don't know if that's true for any other garden aficionados out there. Let me know in the comments. Feel free, by the way, to put anything you have questions or thoughts or want to share about in the comments. I'd love to hear. In my experience with grapes, they usually tend to do best after like a frost or two. They just get super, super sweet. And we haven't had a first frost yet. Our first frost date is October 15th or thereabouts. And these guys are already, not in this picture, but in real life, they're already deliciously dark and dark purple, almost black, and super, super sweet. And so I actually don't think we need a frost this year, and we're going to take them in the next day or two. Make some, we make juice out of them. Their grape juice is so good if you're under the weather or just need a boost. It's just full of vitamins, great antioxidant. It's just so good for you in every way. I love the flavor of homemade Concord grape juice. It's so good. And we don't sweeten it either. We don't do anything to it. And it's just delicious. We did carrots this year, which I don't always do. Some years I get, well, I like to because they're good habitat as well. The swallowtail enjoy laying eggs and eating the tops of the carrot. They won't bother your carrot down below, and it really won't hurt the plant. And it's nice to have butterflies around for lots of different reasons. But carrots are funny because they really do need a nice, soft, easy to grow down through for that big giant taproot kind of soil. And if your soil hasn't been worked or doesn't have enough of that fluffy humus in it that's going to make it an environment that carrots enjoy, then they end up doing all sorts of funky things, and including not growing very much at all. But they'll also like branch out if they hit a rock or something as they're going down. They'll just create these funkadoo shapes, and so they don't look anything like the carrots that you might find in the grocery store. But if you haven't grown and eaten a carrot that you've plucked fresh out of the ground, I invite you to try it. It is delicious. It is a completely different experience. Like, I really can't eat the carrot sticks in the grocery store when I make carrot sticks out of them because they're just kind of woody and sometimes really old. And it's like chewing on a piece of wood. This is a totally different experience, let me tell you. And I like this this variety. I think the Nantes, I want to say it might be a hybrid. I'm not sure it's an heirloom, and I try to choose heirloom varieties because then they breed true on the other side. So if you save the seeds or you let them go to seed, you can harvest those for your next garden experience or your next season. But these are just fun to have, and I pick them when I'm out there weeding and eat them on the spot, which is fun. I am growing lots and lots of flowers this year. In particular, I'm growing dahlias that I want to use in our wedding. I enjoy growing a whole bunch of flowers that I can cut at any given time. I have zinnias, which are great for cut flowers, and cosmos, and all sorts of different things. I can't even remember off the top of my head. but the dahlias are just beautiful. In particular, I have a lot of these crimson red ones that my daughter gave me, and they're just beautiful. And so I'm hoping that we don't get a frost too soon, or that they last until our special day. And I think they will. Today it's like 85 degrees out here and pretty humid in Massachusetts, which is, I don't know, we've got those wild temperatures happening that often occur at the end of the season, where one night it gets down to like 40 degrees and then the next day it's 90. It's bizarre. It's New England for you. I did not know this, and I'm sure many of you already did, but I just learned this a couple years ago, that green peppers, and not just green peppers, rather, any pepper can be perennial if you, depending on where you live. So I know where I am, I have to take it out of the ground and bring it inside. I think if you lived in a more temperate area where it didn't get as cold or it wasn't as harsh, you might be able to do something like mulch the plant, or I don't know if you'd have to bring it all the way inside, like if it didn't get below, say, freezing ever where you are. So in Florida, maybe you can grow these all the time. I don't know, but I overwintered these. So what you do is you'll dig up the pepper before it's frost time. So you don't want to wait until the tissue of the plant gets damaged by nature, because then it'll die instead of going just dormant. So you want to pluck it out of the ground, and the way the pepper plant grows is it's a single stalk, and then of course it comes up and branches out into many different sort of branches from there. You want to cut it back to the first Y, so where the initial stalk branches into two, and it's like the worst haircut ever, because you're cutting off this living green material, and if you grow things all the time, it's just painful, because this plant is perfectly healthy. It looks great. It was in the middle of peppering, and you got to take it and hack it back and I put it in a 5-gallon pot with some decent soil, nothing too crazy. You don't want to fertilize it a bunch or anything like that, because you want it to kind of go to sleep. And then you put it in your house and you keep it around 60 degrees. Also, you don't want to put it in the dark. You want it to have enough sun to survive, but you don't want it to just take off and start growing gangbusters in your house, because it's just not the right season for peppers, at least in New England. So what happens is then in like April, your pepper plant, in your house starts flowering, and you can actually get peppers and put it outside in your garden and get peppers way earlier than you ever would otherwise, which I love, because pepper plants are annoying in that sense that even if you put in starts, it's at least a couple of months before you see anything at all from them. And when they really get going, it's usually right at the end, where the frost is going to come in and take over and kill your plants. So I learned this from a gardener on YouTube. I actually forget who he was now, but I think if I recall correctly, he had been doing it for like 8 years or something. And when I heard it, I was like, no way, but we did it and it works. So I just thought I would pass that along to you. I thought you might enjoy that tip as well, if you hadn't already heard. We plant a lot of things for medicinal use here as much as we can. A lot of our things have dual purpose use. So like if we're thinking about putting in some kind of landscape stuff, for example, we'll put in bushes that can be a hedgerow, but they're also edible to us or to critters in some way that's really good. I try not to buy things that say deer resistant, because I don't want to keep all the wild creatures away. Depending on what it is, of course, I might go to a greater length to protect it from things that are going to predate it, if they can damage the plant. But I always joke about how we all have to pay a nature tax, whether we realize it or not. And certainly the price of growing things without chemicals and certain types of mechanical things, you just pay that nature tax. You have to sacrifice a little bit of what you've tried to grow, because really it doesn't belong to you anyway. It's a gift, and nature takes a little bit for herself, which is fine with me. But we had elderberry that volunteered near where our cows drink, and it looks great. It was doing super well. It flowered much earlier than I thought normally elderberry does, but I think it depends on the variety. And then the birds got every single berry before we got any of it. So it's the way of it sometimes. But if you are looking for things to plant that are going to be healthy for you and for, the wild nature in your life, elderberry is great. It can provide a huge bush in not that much time. So within a couple of years, you're going to get a nice screen if you want some privacy in your yard. If your neighbors are right on top of you, it's actually great. These are our cows. This is just a view from our fire pit, which is kind of where this picture was taken. And these are our maple trees. There's a line of them that goes down. For anybody that watched this at the very beginning, I kind of gave you a tour of our property as far as I could. And so this is the house is essentially behind me and the barn is behind me. And this is looking down our field, at least in part. And these are our belted Galloway. These are the Oreo cookie cows that have black, white, black. And they're very hardy creatures. They get this thick coat in the winter, and they can be outside in almost any situation and do fine. I love that about them. They're not fussy, and they are humongous, though. And our most recent one that we ended up finding out the weight of because we had to put her in the freezer, she was like 1,600 pounds. So they're enormous animals, these full-size ones at least. Oops. This is one I named Marilyn Monroe because she looks blonde, and I don't know, her big eyelashes just reminded me of that. But these are part of the miniatures herd that we just bought this spring. I'm so happy with these guys. These guys have been really great. What they're called Irish Jerseys, and I think also known as a Belmont, but I could be wrong about that. I'm just still learning about this breed, but she stands at like, I don't know, at the hip, like probably 4 feet or not even, like she's at my waist pretty much. She's just not a huge cow. And what makes it nice to not have such a large animal is that she eats the same, which is fine with me, which was a little surprising, I guess, to both Chris and I, how much they actually eat. But because they're a little smaller, you just feel more comfortable around them. You feel like you could have them around kids or other animals, a dog, whatever. Doesn't mean that you should take your eyes off them, and obviously always use caution, but they're just very personable and very sweet and friendly. And I think the people that we purchased them from did a nice job raising them as well. So they're not scared of humans, and they're interested in having a relationship, which I always love. So she enjoys her scritches. She'll headbutt you if you don't keep scratching at her, which is the only thing that's a little scary, because her headbutt, well, it can be a little painful because she's just they're such large animals. They can hurt you without meaning to, but I think we're going to breed her out, and, cow's gestation is about 9 months. And right now what I'm doing with her is I'll get her a treat. Like I'll pick her some special greens, or we don't grain them very often at all. But if I happen to give her something like a little bit of grain, I just touch her everywhere because I want her to get used to me handling her that way. I want her to get used to my hands on her so she doesn't spook and freak out. And I don't think right now we're not really prepared to be milking these guys. So we're going to be building a smaller little, not quite a run-in, but we're going to put on an addition to our standing barn that we have right now that will be having the stanchion and the place where we can have our cows for when we are, when they are in milk. This is another little one, Little Red. She's such a sweetie. Both of these girls are just incredibly nice. They're called heifers because they haven't had any calves yet. And these are just such nice tempered animals. If anybody is interested in cattle of this type, I would encourage you to research them. Irish Jerseys, they're just, and I don't know if all the miniatures are the same. I think they're starting to do that to lots of other cow breeds rather. This one's been around long enough that I think you could say that they don't have a bunch of physical issues as a result of being bred to be a smaller animal. Some breeds, when you try to miniaturize them, it can just cause other problems. So you just want to be mindful of that. And even though they're going to be friendly, they really aren't pets. Like, I think I've seen stuff on social media where people get cows and like really like have them in their house, and that's your choice, obviously. But they're herd animals. They enjoy being with other creatures that also are herd animals, which includes horses. They could be with horses, but these guys are settling in just fine. And in fact, this one, she's our boss bitch. She's in charge of the whole herd. And she actually beats up the other Belted Galloway, the Oreo cookie cows that we have. She's just incredibly bossy and somewhat aggressive sometimes. Like when we open up a new paddock, she's the one that wants to be there first, and she will just push everybody else out of the way. And because of her horns, I haven't felt comfortable trying to milk her because she's also a head tosser, and that makes me nervous. I don't want to be having to get gored because she's uncomfortable with what I'm doing. And so until we figure out how we're dealing with her horns, whether we're putting pool noodles on them or investigating getting them removed, I don't think I'm going to be doing that. She does have a baby right now, so she is in milk, but I'm okay waiting a little bit. I'd just rather be safe than sorry. And this is her son. He's a steer. He's been steered. So the vet, typically in our case, we've used, the vet takes like a band and puts it around the ball sack, and then it falls off. So they still have most of their maleness is intact, but not all of it. And he's real happy. He's doing so great. He's really starting to become more friendly as well. And this year we put in a pond, at least. Don't tell anybody that. It's not like a huge thing, but I think in this corner of the world you have to get like all sorts of what do they call it? You have to notify this and that agency to try and dig a hole in your own yard, which is annoying. But we have such well-drained soil that we had to put a pond liner in. And you can see here we've got some we've got little lily, oh, my thing's malfunctioning. Got little lily pads growing there. Our friend Norm donated, and the pond liner still has to be, we're going to cover it a little bit and put some more rocks over it, but we're planting things around it, and we've got a solar filter that's working. At the middle, it's actually like 8 feet deep. It doesn't look like it, but it's actually really deep. And we've got frogs already starting to make homes in there, which is awesome. How did they do that, by the way? How does a frog know? Like, it just smells the air and it's like, oh, that neighbor over on 42nd Street put in a pond. Better get over there. Like, how? I just don't understand how animals communicate. So we have come to the end of the presentation. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart and from our heart, I really hope that you had a really wonderful growing year. I wish you blessings in everything that you're doing in your lives, with your families, with your children, for yourself, and for this larger world, wherever you are. And then I wanted to read one quick thing before we leave each other. It's called, probably heard of it, It's called The Guest House, and it's by Rumi. It says, this being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each one has been sent as a guide from beyond. So great visiting with you. I hope you all have a wonderful week until I see you next time, next Thursday at 3 o'clock. Until then, take good care of yourselves and each other. Bye.